March 10, 1945. 32,000 feet above Tokyo. Cold air cuts through the cockpit like a knife. Below, the city stretches endlessly, a sea of dim lights and black rivers, barely visible through a thin layer of clouds. The night is calm, too calm. Lieutenant Saburo Tanaka, an Imperial Japanese Navy fighter pilot, scans the sky from the cockpit of his Mitsubishi A6M0. Nothing. For months now, this has become routine. American B-29 Superfortress bombers appear high above Japan, drop their bombs, and leave, unchallenged, because the fighters meant to stop them simply cannot reach them. Tanaka adjusts his oxygen mask and glances at the fuel gauge. It's already dangerously low. The climb alone has drained most of the tank. The Americans know it. They always stay just out of reach, above 30,000 feet. Too high, too far. The radio crackles. Multiple B-29 formations approaching Tokyo Bay. Tanaka tightens his grip on the control stick. The bombers appear as tiny silver specks gliding calmly through the stratosphere. Massive aircraft, 4 engines, long wings. They look slow, but they are untouchable. Japanese fighters can intercept briefly, maybe fire a few shots before fuel forces them back toward the ground. And tonight will be no different. At least, that's what every Japanese pilot believes. Far to the south, beyond the horizon, something new has entered the sky. Hundreds of miles away, on the captured island of Iwo Jima, American ground crews are finishing their work under floodlights. Fuel hoses disconnect. Propellers begin to spin. One by one, sleek silver fighters roll forward across the runway. Not bombers, fighters. Long-nosed, narrow-winged, built for speed. The P-51 Mustang. Each one carries something revolutionary hanging beneath its wings. Drop tanks, extra fuel, enough to cross an ocean of sky. Inside one cockpit, Captain William Hinton pushes the throttle forward. The Packard-built Merlin engine roars to life, vibrating through the aircraft like thunder trapped in metal. For years, the Pacific skies have belonged to Japan. But tonight, something has changed. The Mustangs lift off into the darkness, climbing steadily into the night sky. Their destination lies nearly 700 miles away, Tokyo. Hours later, high above the Japanese capital, Tanaka finally begins his attack on the B-29 formation. He lines up the bombers in his gun sight. Just a few seconds of firing before fuel forces him to turn back. But then, his radio explodes with frantic shouting, "Enemy fighters! Enemy fighters over Tokyo!" Tanaka freezes. That's impossible. American fighters cannot reach Japan. Everyone knows that. Yet a moment later, he sees them. Dark shapes cutting through the moonlight. Fast, low, closing rapidly. And on their wings, white stars. The impossible has arrived. American fighters over Tokyo. And for the first time in the war, Japanese pilots realize the sky above their homeland is no longer theirs. But the shock in that moment was only the beginning, because what the P-51 Mustang was about to do to Japan's air defenses would change the Pacific War forever.
Long before the Mustangs appeared over Tokyo, there was a problem. A massive one. Summer 1944, Washington, D.C., War Department. Maps of the Pacific cover the walls. Red pins mark Japanese cities. Blue pins show American bases scattered across thousands of miles of ocean. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces, stands silently in front of the largest map. One word is circled in thick red pencil: Japan. For years, American planners had dreamed of bombing the Japanese home islands the same way Germany was being bombed in Europe, relentlessly, daily, until industry collapsed. But geography made that dream nearly impossible. Japan was simply too far away. The early B-29 missions launched from China had already proven that. Fuel had to be flown over the Himalayas just to supply the bases. Every bombing run required an enormous logistical effort. And even then, fighter escort was impossible. No American fighter had the range. Not the P-38 Lightning, not the P-47 Thunderbolt, not even the early P-51 models. Bombers were forced to fly alone, which meant Japanese interceptors could attack them freely. The first B-29 crews learned this quickly. November 24, 1944, the first large-scale B-29 raid against Tokyo. More than 100 superfortresses crossed the Japanese coastline at nearly 30,000 feet. Below them, sirens screamed across the city, searchlights stabbed the sky, and Japanese fighters climbed to meet them. K-84 Hayates, J-2M Raidens, A-6M Zeros. Some pilots rammed the bombers directly in desperate suicide attacks known as Tai Atari. Others attacked from above, firing heavy cannons into the B-29 formations. The Superfortress was heavily armed, dozens of machine guns controlled by remote turrets. But numbers mattered. Without escort fighters to drive the interceptors away, the bombers had to fight alone. Damage reports piled up. Aircraft returning with shredded wings, engines destroyed, entire crews missing. Still, the bombings continued, because by late 1944, something had changed in the Pacific. American forces had captured a small volcanic island halfway between the Marianas and Japan, a barren black rock island with a strange name, Iwo Jima. When Marines first landed there in February 1945, the battle turned into one of the most brutal fights of the entire war. Japanese defenders hid in tunnels and bunkers carved deep into the volcanic rock. Every inch of ground had to be taken with flamethrowers and grenades. Over 26,000 casualties followed. But when the fighting finally ended, American engineers moved in almost immediately. Bulldozers flattened the battlefield. Runways appeared where artillery craters had been only days before. 3 long airstrips cut across the island. At first, they were intended for something simple: emergency landing fields for damaged B-29 bombers returning from Japan. But then someone realized something far more important. From Iwo Jima, American fighters could finally reach the Japanese mainland. Barely. The distance from Iwo Jima to Tokyo was about 650 miles. Round trip, nearly 1,300 miles. No fighter had ever flown a combat mission that far, which meant if this plan was going to work, the aircraft would need to do something no fighter had done before: fly farther than anyone thought possible. And that responsibility would fall on one aircraft, the P-51 Mustang. But the Mustang that would change the Pacific War was not the same aircraft that had dominated Europe. This version would carry something new, something that would transform it into the longest-ranged fighter of the entire war. And when Japanese radar operators first detected those fighters approaching the mainland, they assumed the machines on their screens were a mistake.
March 7, 1945. Iwo Jima Airfield No. 1. The ground still smells like burnt cordite and volcanic ash. Only 2 weeks earlier, this island had been a battlefield. Now it has become something else entirely: a launch point. Rows of silver fighters sit along the runway in the pale morning light. Their polished aluminum skins reflect the rising sun. The P-51D Mustang. To anyone seeing them for the first time, they look elegant, almost delicate. Long nose, bubble canopy, thin wings designed for speed. But the real secret isn't visible at first glance. Under each wing hangs a metal cylinder, 110-gallon drop tanks, extra fuel, a lot of it. Ground crews move quickly between the aircraft, tightening fuel caps, checking ammunition belts, feeding into the 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns mounted in each wing. A Mustang pilot walks slowly toward his aircraft. Captain William Bill Hinton, 15th Fighter Group. He runs his hand across the smooth aluminum fuselage before climbing into the cockpit. Inside, the cockpit smells of oil and metal. Instruments glow faintly as the engine starter engages. Then, the Packard-built Merlin V1650 engine roars to life, a deep, powerful growl. This engine was the heart of the Mustang's magic. Originally designed in Britain by Rolls-Royce, the Merlin gave the P-51 incredible performance at high altitude, but its true advantage was efficiency. The aircraft could fly farther than any fighter before it, much farther. But even the Mustang had limits. The mission ahead will push those limits to the edge. Hinton studies the map clipped to his kneeboard. Iwo Jima. Then hundreds of miles of empty Pacific. Then the Japanese coastline. Then Tokyo. And finally the long flight home. One mistake with fuel, and the ocean would claim another aircraft. Around him, dozens of other pilots climb into their fighters. These men are part of the 15th Fighter Group, newly assigned to escort B-29 bombers attacking the Japanese homeland. For years, bomber crews have flown these missions alone. No protection, no escort, just hundreds of miles of enemy territory. That changes today. The radio crackles. Red leader to all Mustangs, engines start. Propellers spin. One after another, the aircraft roll forward toward the runway. The sound becomes thunder. When the first Mustang lifts off, the aircraft feels heavy, fully loaded with fuel and ammunition. But once airborne, the Merlin engine begins to sing. The formation climbs steadily into the morning sky. 10,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet. Below them, the Pacific Ocean stretches endlessly to the horizon. Hours pass. The pilots sit alone in their cockpits with nothing but the sound of the engine and the constant calculation running through their minds. Fuel, range, distance. Every pilot watches the gauges carefully, because no fighter in history has attempted a combat escort mission this long. And somewhere ahead, Japan waits. Eventually, a thin gray line appears on the horizon, the Japanese mainland. The Mustangs climb even higher now, moving into position above the approaching B-29 Superfortress formations. Huge aircraft, 4 engines, wide wings. They look like floating fortresses compared to the sleek fighters escorting them. For the bomber crews, the sight is something they've never experienced before. American fighters flying beside them over Japan. One B-29 gunner leans out of his blister window and stares. Mustangs glide past the bomber formation, sunlight flashing across their wings. Protection has finally arrived. But far below, Japanese radar stations have already detected the incoming aircraft. Operators stare at the screens in confusion. Multiple formations approaching. Bombers and something else. Fast-moving, smaller, fighter-sized. That shouldn't be possible. American fighters cannot reach Japan. Yet the radar signals keep getting closer. And in airfields across the Tokyo region, Japanese pilots are being ordered into the sky to intercept. Many of them expect another familiar battle. A brief climb, a quick attack against bombers, then a return to base before the fuel runs out. None of them realize that today,
They will meet an enemy they never expected to see over their homeland. And the shock of that encounter will shatter one of Japan's most important assumptions about the war.
March 10, 1945. Over Tokyo Bay. Japanese radar stations had already sounded the alarm. Sirens wailed across the capital as formations of B-29 Superfortresses approached the city once again. By now, this had become grim routine. Climb, intercept, attack the bombers, then return before fuel ran out. At Kisarazu Airfield, Lieutenant Saburo Tanaka pushes his Mitsubishi A6M0 down the runway and lifts into the cold morning sky. The climb is steep. Japanese fighters struggle to reach the altitude where the B-29s operate. Their engines strain as they climb toward 30,000 feet. But Tanaka has done this before. The bombers will be alone. They always are. He levels out above the clouds and finally spots them. A long silver line stretching across the sky. The B-29 formation. Massive aircraft moving steadily toward Tokyo. Tanaka begins to maneuver into position. His plan is simple. Attack from above, fire a short burst into one bomber's engines, then break away before the defensive guns can track him. He begins the dive. But something is wrong. Very wrong. A shape flashes past his canopy. Fast. Too fast. At first he thinks it's another Japanese fighter. Then he sees the wings. Low profile, long nose, and painted on the side, a white American star. Tanaka stares in disbelief. An American fighter. Over Tokyo? Before he can even react, another Mustang slices through the formation, its 6 machine guns erupting in bright flashes. Tracer rounds tear across the sky. A nearby K-84 Hayate fighter bursts into flames. The pilot barely has time to bail out before the aircraft spirals downward. Japanese pilots across the formation begin shouting into their radios. "Enemy fighters! American fighters!" Confusion spreads instantly. This was never supposed to happen. For years, Japanese air defense planning depended on one simple assumption. American fighters could not escort bombers all the way to Japan. That assumption has just died. The P-51 Mustangs dive aggressively into the intercepting fighters. Their advantage is immediate and overwhelming. Speed. The Mustang can fly more than 430 miles per hour at altitude. The Zero struggles to reach 330, and the difference is devastating. Mustangs slash through Japanese formations with high-speed attacks, firing short bursts before climbing away again. Boom and zoom. The Japanese fighters try to turn and dogfight, tactics that had worked earlier in the war. But the Mustang pilots refuse to engage that way. Instead, they keep their speed. Strike, climb, strike again. Another Zero explodes in midair. A K-84 breaks apart under a burst of .50 caliber fire. Within minutes, the sky is chaos. Above the bombers, Mustangs circle like hawks, intercepting any Japanese fighter that gets too close. For the B-29 crews, the change is immediate. Gunners who once faced waves of interceptors now watch American fighters tearing through the attackers. The pressure lifts. For the first time in months, the bombers can focus on their mission instead of constant survival. Below them, Tokyo grows larger. Miles of wooden buildings and narrow streets stretch toward the horizon. Inside the city, people hear the growing roar of engines overhead. Searchlights sweep the sky. Anti-aircraft guns begin firing. But the real battle is happening thousands of feet above. And Japanese pilots are starting to realize something terrifying. The Mustangs aren't just fast. They're everywhere. And they aren't running out of fuel. Tanaka pulls his Zero into a desperate turn, trying to shake a Mustang that has just dropped behind him. The American fighter stays glued to his tail. The Merlin engine howls as the Mustang closes in. 6 machine guns flash. Tanaka jerks the controls violently. Tracer rounds tear past his wing. He dives for the clouds below. Only then does the Mustang break away. The American pilot doesn't chase. He climbs back toward the bombers, back to where the real mission is happening, protecting the B-29s. Above Tokyo, the sky now belongs to someone else, and the Japanese pilots fighting that morning slowly begin to understand a terrifying truth. If American fighters can reach Japan, then nowhere in the empire is safe anymore. But the true consequences of that realization were only beginning, because the P-51 escort missions were about to unleash something far more destructive than Japanese pilots had ever faced before.
March 10th, 1945, Tokyo. Far below the battle in the sky, millions of people sleep inside a city built mostly of wood and paper. Narrow streets, tightly packed houses, entire districts connected like dry kindling. At 25,000 feet, the B-29 formation reaches its bombing point. Inside one bomber, Captain Robert Morgan, aircraft commander, studies the illuminated bomb site. The city fills the glass. Bomb bay doors open. Cold air floods the aircraft as the massive doors beneath the fuselage slide apart. Behind the bomber, dozens of other superfortresses hold perfect formation. Hundreds of bomb racks wait. But these are not ordinary bombs. They are M69 incendiaries, small steel cylinders designed to start fires. Thousands of them. General Curtis LeMay, commander of the 21st Bomber Command, had made a controversial decision. Instead of high-altitude precision bombing, the B-29s would attack Tokyo at lower altitude and drop incendiaries designed to ignite the city itself. Japan's cities were extremely vulnerable. Most buildings were wooden. Once the fires started, they would feed each other. Morgan steadies the bomber. The crosshairs settle over the industrial district along the Sumida River. Bombs away! The aircraft suddenly rises slightly as thousands of pounds of weight fall away. Below, clusters of incendiaries tumble through the darkness. When they hit the ground, each one bursts open, spraying burning napalm gel in every direction. Within seconds, hundreds of small fires ignite across the city. Then thousands. The flames spread quickly from rooftop to rooftop. Wind begins to pull the fires together. Blocks ignite. Entire neighborhoods vanish into smoke. Within an hour, the fires merge into something much worse. A firestorm. Hot air rises violently, pulling oxygen into the inferno from every direction. Winds begin to roar through the streets like a giant furnace. People run, but there is nowhere to go. Temperatures climb high enough to melt steel. Above the city, B-29 crews watch in stunned silence. One bombardier later wrote that the flames were so bright he could read a newspaper inside the aircraft. From high above, Tokyo looks like a single burning ocean. More than 16 square miles of the city will burn that night. Nearly 100,000 people will die. It will become the most destructive air raid in human history. But while the fires rage below, the Mustangs continue their patrol above the bombers. Every few minutes, Japanese fighters attempt another desperate climb toward the formation. Each time, they meet the same wall of American fighters.
A Mustang dives. Machine guns flash. Another interceptor disappears in smoke. For Japanese pilots, the realization is becoming painfully clear. The bombers are no longer vulnerable. The American fighters have changed the rules of the war. And with the skies over Japan now open, the bombing campaign will only grow more devastating. But the impact of the Mustang goes far beyond a single night. Because from this moment forward, every bombing raid over Japan will have protection. And Japan's shrinking air force will soon face an enemy it cannot stop.
Spring 1945. The Pacific War is entering its final phase. From the newly secured airfields on Iwo Jima, American fighters begin launching daily missions toward Japan. Again and again, long silver formations of P-51 Mustangs rise into the morning sky. Each mission stretches the limits of range and endurance. Nearly 8 hours in the cockpit, more than 1,300 miles of flight. But the result is devastating. Where once Japanese interceptors could swarm the B-29 bombers, they now face something entirely different. A wall of fast, aggressive fighters already waiting for them. Radar stations across the Japanese mainland begin detecting the formations earlier and earlier. The operators now know the signals well. Large returns, B-29 bombers, and around them, smaller blips moving faster, the Mustangs. At airfields around Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka, Japanese pilots scramble into the sky. But the war has changed. Fuel is scarce. Replacement pilots have far less training than those lost earlier in the conflict. Many climb into the air knowing their aircraft are already inferior. The Mitsubishi Zero, once feared across the Pacific, is now hopelessly outmatched at high altitude. Even newer fighters like the K-84 Hayate struggle against the Mustang's speed and firepower. Still, they climb, because they have no choice. Above the bombers, Mustang pilots patrol in loose formations. They know the enemy will come. And when the Japanese fighters finally appear, the battles begin instantly. High-speed dives, sharp climbs, long bursts of machine gun fire tearing through the thin air. The Mustang's advantage is brutal. With its Merlin engine, the aircraft performs superbly at high altitude, exactly where the B-29 bombers operate. Japanese fighters that try to climb into the formation are intercepted before they can even reach firing range. Those that do get close rarely survive long. American pilots begin calling the missions fighter sweeps. Instead of simply escorting bombers, Mustangs now range ahead of the formations, hunting Japanese aircraft before they can even take off. Some missions target airfields directly. Pilots dive low across runways, strafing parked fighters and fuel trucks. Machine gun fire rips across hangars and maintenance areas. Smoke rises from burning aircraft before they ever leave the ground. Japan's air defenses begin to collapse. But the Mustang's impact reaches even further, because the aircraft does something else the Japanese never expected. It escorts bombers all the way home. Before Iwo Jima was captured, damaged B-29 bombers often had to struggle back across hundreds of miles of ocean alone. Many never made it. Now the Mustangs fly with them all the way back to the island, and Iwo Jima itself becomes something extraordinary. During the final months of the war, more than 2,200 B-29 bombers will make emergency landings there. Aircraft riddled with bullet holes, engines failing, landing gear destroyed. Thousands of American airmen survive because that small volcanic island lies in the middle of the Pacific. And every time a damaged bomber limps toward Iwo Jima, Mustangs often escort it the final miles, watching,
guarding, making sure it reaches the runway. For the Japanese High Command, the situation becomes increasingly desperate. Factories burn, cities burn, oil supplies vanish, and now even the skies above Japan belong to the Americans. By the summer of 1945, Mustang pilots are flying missions not just over Tokyo, but across the entire Japanese mainland. The homeland that once seemed untouchable is now completely exposed. But the final months of the war will bring something even shocking than American fighters over Tokyo. Because soon, a single weapon will appear that no fighter pilot, Japanese or American, can stop.